Hi guys, today we're going to be answering the question, was the Biosyn DLC for Jurassic World Evolution 2 worth it? Now if you've seen anything at all about this expansion pack, you'll know that everything on offer within it pertains to the most recent Jurassic World movie, Dominion. We've got a couple of new campaign missions and a Chaos Theory mode, both of which revolve around events and locations from the film. Then we've got some new dinosaurs that were prominent in the movie. And finally we've got some buildings and decorations that are all Biosyn themed. And whilst that does describe some of the content on offer for this DLC, we'd have to dig a little bit deeper to get a clear picture on whether this expansion pack is actually worth it. As this is coming in at £15.99 or $20 or so for our US friends, it's definitely worth making sure you want the extra content on offer here. At this point I've purchased the DLC, I've played through all of the modes, I've had a thorough look at the dinosaurs, and I've analysed what my feelings were throughout the experience, so I'll hopefully be able to help a few of you out when it comes to deciding today. With all that said, let's move on to our first topic. So first of all I'd like to start by talking about the modes on offer. We've got two campaign missions which are Sanctuary and Scorched Earth, and these both directly relate to Biosyn Valley and the events of Dominion. And while I doubt that it's completely canon, Sanctuary acts as a sort of prequel to that film, and it has you settling into Biosyn Valley, getting the operations centre functioning, and then turning the map into a place where the dinosaurs can live peacefully, but while Biosyn studies them to produce products for various worldly uses, such as medicine, beauty products, all that kind of stuff. To me, the fun parts were seeing more about Dodgson, Ramsey, and the beginnings of Biosyn Valley, as opposed to the gameplay itself. It really helps to pad out Dominion and the character of Dodgson, both of which I think suffered from having way too much story to tell in a single movie. We saw Dodgson in Camp Cretaceous and we learned a little bit more about him there, and the same exact feeling washed over me when playing this mission, that it was here to provide exposition more than entertainment. Now having said all of that, the developers did try to make this a fresh experience and I can really give them credit for that. All of the new dinosaurs make an appearance in this mode, such as the Dimetrodon, Therizinosaurus, Dreadnoughtus and the Giganotosaurus, and the opportunity to extract the other classic ones like the T-Rex or the Dilophosaurus is also present. They introduced the Amber Mines as a new gameplay feature, and these replace traditional expeditions. And even if they are sort of the same thing, it all relates back to the movie, so it's just kind of welcome, you know? They utilised all of the new additions from the DLC as well, like the research outposts and invisible fencing, and they also used the unique features of the map like the Hyperloop. More importantly, they tried their absolute best to make it feel like you're contributing towards the events of Dominion. There are hints here and there of Dodgson's true nature, and you can hear some doubts voiced by Ramsey throughout, setting the stage for their futures with the company. There's always that classic theme of control running throughout the dialogue as well, and I think Crichton would have appreciated that. Dodgson will time and again comment on how he's the exact opposite of Hammond, and how he and Biosyn won't fail where others did previously. He slates Hammond and Masrani for their flawed ideology, before then presenting his own flawed ideology.
Yeah, let me put your fears to rest. I am not Hammond. He was all ego. I am not Masrani and his tech-first approach. We are set up to succeed, and that is what we're going to do.
It's just a nice touch. I did have fun with this mission, and it was nice seeing behind that shady Biosyn curtain, but I really think it comes down to what you prefer, as it's centered around the story and exposition, rather than particularly riveting gameplay. Moving on, we've got the Scorched Earth mission, and this one instead deals with the aftermath of Dominion. So after Dodgson torches the place in the movie, trying to burn his evidence, the task of cleaning up Biosyn Valley in this mission is left to Owen and Claire, who then bring in Alan and Ellie to help. And honestly, this one was so much harder to praise than the last. It provides no real exposition since it deals with a fantasy scenario from after Dominion ends, and the mode itself is just painfully short. It only took me about 45 minutes to complete, and it's just so repetitive because your objectives are only to clear the areas of burnt forest and land, and then you've got to repair the existing structures like the research outposts, and then finally you've just got to make sure that a few different species of dinosaur are happy in the environment that you've cleaned up. And you know what, it's actually a real shame that this mode falls short, because the Burnt Forest and the campaign premise are actually really interesting, but it's just the objectives that are brief and boring. For me personally, I'd like to see objectives that are outside the box. You know, like maybe the Therizinosaurus is killing 1 or 2 wild dinosaurs and you've got to stop it before it reaches a certain number of kills. Or the T-Rexes are running out of a natural supply of food, and before they inevitably turn on one another, you've got to get them tranquilized into an enclosure and comfortable with enough food. It just seems like they instead choose to copy and paste objectives from one mode to another when it comes to stopping disease, or researching something, or getting enclosures ready for incoming dinosaurs, and it doesn't keep me captivated in all honesty. I'd have to say that this mission really doesn't deserve to be advertised as a mission within the DLC. It's too short, too boring, and I just don't have much else to say than what I already have because of how short the experience was. So we're moving on. But fear not, because next up is the Chaos Theory mode, and wow, this was a really good one. I'm not kidding when I say that this was some of the most fun I've had when playing a Jurassic World Evolution mission, either in the first one, or this one, or even just a game in general, and there are some really good reasons why. The premise of this mode is that Owen's ranch up in Sierra Nevada has the capability of housing some dinosaurs, and the DFW and Cabot Finch are interested in bringing a few in. The twist is that poachers are staging attacks on the camp and they're trying to steal a few dinosaurs at a time. This literally involves AI-controlled vehicles driving towards your camp from all directions out of the forest, attempting to tranquilise dinosaurs and then transport them away. You're given all kinds of new tech to fend them off, including watchtowers, floodlights, flashbangs and heat detectors, and in order to stop the raid on your camp, you have to ram into the incoming vehicles with your own ranger vehicles and scare them away before they steal too many dinosaurs. The great thing is that they took out the ability to just cheese the mission by giving you a limited amount of fencing and placeable decorations, so you can't just block the poachers off, you really have to put the work in. The mode then ramps up when the DFW wants to turn this into a non-profit park because they've got no more funding. Without the funding, you won't have any money to care for the dinosaurs or keep them out of the hands of the poachers, so you're now presented with the challenge of successfully running a small park while simultaneously defending from poachers on the regular. Now it depends what kind of player you are in JWA, but I personally love new gameplay mechanics and interesting objectives like these, because while the game functions well as a park builder or park management game, or even as a storytelling game in some cases, it's so rare to see outside of the box thinking when it comes to the gameplay itself. In fact, it's precisely what I wanted when I talked about the Scorched Earth mode previously. Dinosaur wrangling is another great example of how this outside the box thinking pays dividends when it comes to the gameplay. Being able to summon dinosaurs to your vehicle and then send them onto a distant location is brilliant, and it was such an exciting way to start the mode. Now look, there's not a ton of exposition or story to tell because it's once again just a fantasy scenario, but the gameplay is just so fun that it absolutely makes up for it. Scrambling around trying to stop poachers from stealing the dinosaurs and planning the park out so you have enough room to expand without making yourself vulnerable to the attackers is chaos at its finest, and I loved every minute of it. Of the 3 additional modes, this was my favourite by far. Before I move on to another topic, one thing I just wanted to mention is that the Biosyn Valley and Sierra Nevada maps from these modes are available in Sandbox, which is great, but for some reason they're not available in Challenge mode yet. Hopefully we'll get an update in future that fixes that, but it's just worth keeping in mind. So now let's talk about the new dinosaurs and their skins and variants. We've got a few new species in the Dimetrodon, Therizinosaurus, Pyroraptor and Quetzalcoatlus, and each of them look really amazing. They're all things I've always wanted to see in a Jurassic World Evolution game, just with how unique and incredible they are. They all do justice to the movie counterparts, sure, but they provide a really great alternative to the usual when you're building a sandbox park or just playing through the campaign and challenge modes again. Sure, everyone's got their favourites, but I just think this batch in particular are so much better than, say, the early Cretaceous pack, or those that we received with the deluxe edition of the game. Then we've also got a few alternatives in the skins and variants. The Dreadnoughtus, Parasaurolophus and Giganotosaurus all have a variant, meaning that their movie appearance has been added as a sort of skin pattern under the dinosaur itself, much like how Big E.T. was for the T-Rex in the Camp Cretaceous pack. Unfortunately, there's a huge downside to this in that a variant cannot apply other skin patterns to itself. So you know how you can flip through all of the different colour tones for a dinosaur and then incubate it with whichever you want? Well, for the Giganotosaurus, Parasaurolophus and Dreadnoughtus, there are no skin patterns to go over the new design, so you can only choose the movie accurate representation, which isn't available with any skin pattern or colour over the top of that base variant. Now, it's the same case for the feathered T-Rex, but it just seems more prominent in the previous cases, because the Dominion Giga, as an example, is basically a new design instead of an altered one, so it's just something to bear in mind is all I'm saying. There are also some additional skins for the Dilophosaurus, a feathered T-Rex and a scarred T-Rex, or in other words, Rexy herself. There are some decent visuals and variants on offer here, and I think the Feathered Rex, Dominion Giga and Dilophosaurus are particularly appealing as new additions to sandbox packs. My only real issue with the dinosaur additions, other than the previous issue surrounding variants, is that we're missing several creatures from the movie. The Atrociraptor, Microceratus and Oviraptor, as an example, are all absent from this expansion pack. Now, the only reason I can think of as to why this is the case is that most of these dinosaurs are from the Malta sequence, and so we might get a free or paid DLC in future which adds these, along with a mission or map to go with it. Either way, missing dinosaurs is something to consider if, say, the Atrociraptor was something that you really wanted to see in the game, and despite the name of the DLC, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was all about Dominion. So lastly, we're talking about facilities and decorations, and this was actually a very difficult one for me, because on one hand, I think the Biosyn themed facilities are stunning. You know, they're high tech, they're sleek, and they really look like something that Biosyn genuinely would have produced. There's a variety to pick from, and it's just nice to see things like the Biosyn helicopters from the movie just sitting in the response facility, or placing down a fountain that the T-Rex moved behind in the final sequence of the movie. And then you've got the designs themselves. You know, a lot of the buildings look like they're a part of the environment, which really suits the Biosyn Valley map. Like the emergency shelter, which has plant life and grass growing on the roof. Then you've got the staff centre, which has got a really unusual shape, and it's just a nice way to utilise an otherwise ordinary building. The research outposts are back from the movie, and they're incredible too. You can actually move the platform up and down for different views, or just as an aesthetic choice for the park that you're building. There's some great variety, and it all fits the theme of the DLC. But on the other hand, once again we are left with missing pieces to the puzzle when it comes to what we're given. There are no Biosyn themed aviary or lagoon facilities, and the decorations we're given are extremely limited and way too familiar to one another. Now yes, I know technically the film didn't have lagoons or aviaries, but I'm just so puzzled as to why they wouldn't include structures like that would have benefited, say, a sandbox park. Presumably they created most of these designs from scratch, like the response facility or emergency shelter, because they weren't in the movie. So I just think it's a little bit of laziness on Frontier's part to purposely leave out aviary and lagoon facilities. And now we move on to something even more disappointing, and it's probably my biggest pet peeve if I'm honest, which is decorations. There are just so many similar decorations in this DLC, but none of which that really fulfill different purposes. And what I mean by this is that there are so many opportunities where Frontier could provide useful decorations, whether it's a set of wheelie bins, or a bench, or a statue, which would make the parks you build look like real parks. But instead, Frontier opt to produce several similar looking fountains. Now yeah, one or two of these would have been welcome, but at some point they've got to start putting decorations into the game that actually provide the function of making a park look real, instead of just fountains, planters and lighting. We've got too many of those. The interesting thing is, so many of these have already been produced as an asset on various facilities, like the bench seen here. So all they'd need to do is produce them individually, but it's not like they'd be creating many of these from scratch. They did include some of the decorations from the Chaos Theory mode in Sierra Nevada, like the watchtower and heat detectors, but these don't feel like they provide the purpose of making a park feel more real in the way that a bench, bin or statue would. Even some new pathing choices at this point would go a long way to making each park you build stand out, and Frontier could quite easily create various designs. Other park management games do a fantastic job in this regard, so I'm unsure why it's still lacking in this game. In short, if you're purchasing this DLC in the hopes that you'll have plenty of new decorations to put in your park, then you'll probably be left feeling disappointed. So let's hope we get some more in a free update in future. So before we move on to the conclusion, I've just collated everything we've talked about so far into 2 separate visuals for us to recap in a more simple manner: the good and the bad. The pros of purchasing this DLC are that you gain access to 2 new campaign missions and 1 Chaos Theory mission, and you can use the maps from these modes in a sandbox build. There are a few new gameplay features within these modes too that are really great additions, like the Amber Mines and Dinosaur Wrangling. Next up, we've got several new dinosaurs, such as the Dimetrodon and Therizinosaurus, with a few new variants too, such as the Giganotosaurus 2022, Feathered T-Rex, and Parasaurolophus 2022. Lastly, there are new Biosyn themed facilities and structures for most of the existing types of buildings, some more decorations that are also Biosyn themed, and then some extra decorations from the Sierra Nevada mission. The cons of purchasing this DLC are that a few dinosaurs are missing from the expansion pack, which you'd likely expect to be present when first purchasing, most notably the Atrociraptor. In relation to this, some of the new dinosaur variants are only available in that one variant, so instead of being able to place skin patterns over the top of it, they'll only ever have one appearance. This is particularly a shame with something like the Giganotosaurus, which is for all intents and purposes a brand new design. Not all of the facilities and structures have been given a Biosyn makeover, with the lagoon and aviary facilities missing out in particular. Similarly, the decorations provided in this DLC are very basic, and are types that we already have lots of, like fountains and lighting, instead of things like benches and statues. As far as I could tell, the Biosyn Valley and Sierra Nevada maps were also not available to play in challenge mode, although this might change in future. Lastly, at a price of £15.99 or $20, this is quite an expensive DLC considering there seems to be missing content, or at least a lack of content in terms of missing variant skin choices, placeable decorations and buildings, etc. So with all that said, it's now time for the verdict, and my answer for whether this DLC is actually worth it or not is yes, but with a few conditions. Really, you need to know what type of player you are in order to decide whether this DLC is worth it for you. The focus of the DLC seemed to be on the new maps and modes, with a further focus on exposition and the new gameplay features. And in that regard, if all of those things sound great to you, then it's definitely worth it. But on the other hand, if you're a player who wants lots of new buildings and decorations for sandbox builds, and the modes aren't as important to you, then you'll probably be disappointed with this DLC, especially for the price. You're paying for the modes and maps, voice acting by all the movie stars, and new gameplay features, more so than things you can use to better your sandbox builds. Yes, you'll get a few new dinosaurs and a couple of new maps with some more buildings, but the price seems a bit steep for these things alone. It's a shame in a sense that the dinosaurs and variants you get are so amazing, because it really does feel like you'd be missing out with the Dimetrodon or Therizinosaurus if you didn't purchase the DLC, and I know these were praised by the majority of players. I just feel some sympathy for people who are less interested in the modes and are more interested in ways they could better their sandbox builds, because there could have and should have been more content for those types of players within this DLC. Frontier needs to realise just how many people out there devote time to building sandbox parks and start to incorporate more decorations and buildings into the mix. Having said all of this, I enjoyed both sides of this DLC, and that's why I think it's worth it. The Sanctuary mission was nice for some more exposition on Biosyn and Dodgson, even if it wasn't the most fun I've ever had in a mode, and the Chaos Theory mode on Sierra Nevada was the complete opposite, with very little exposition or story, but it was just non-stop fun. Both of the maps were fresh and unique, and I also appreciated the gameplay features it introduced in those maps and modes. While I probably won't use them in Sandbox, I think they were very entertaining within the missions themselves. The dinosaurs and variants introduced were all great, and I think aside from the fact that they've provided very limited decorations, I enjoyed all aspects of the DLC as opposed to very specific parts. There's no guarantee that we'll get more decorations in a free update, but even if we didn't, would I still want to pay $15.99 to access these modes, maps and dinosaurs? In my case, that's a yes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, whatever that might be. This is the Fossil Fool, signing out.